Evening and welcome once again to Gaming Under the Influence. I'm Mike here with Alex, coming to you from GreenDragonCVR in Woodbridge to talk again about video games. How are you, bud?
Oh yeah, doing good, man. How are you?
I'm well. I'm enjoying Metaphor Fantasio.
Oh, I bet.
Cool game. What are you playing?
I've been playing Warhammer Space Marines too. It's actually pretty sick, man. It's kind of giving me like a little bit of a Gears of War vibe, you know, which is something that hasn't really been around for a while, you know, like that specific thing. And plus, I've never really dabbled in the Warhammer like genre at all in video games or like tabletop, anything really. I've never engaged with it at all, and I think it's a really cool sort of like series and really cool imagery, right? It evokes like some you know, cool fictional shit.
It does have a lot of cool stuff right? about it, absolutely.
Very like macho and like brother, like, you know.
Yeah,
it's kind of refreshing actually with everything that's been going on lately.
It certainly feels out of place.
Yeah,
in 2024 from a Western studio especially.
But honestly, it's fun. It plays good. It's I put it on the veteran difficulty, I think it was called, basically the one that it says is standard, and it's challenging enough that you know you're gonna take some beatings, and it's tough. It's cool. It's not just like a walk in the park, so it's been fun. It's
Hope
a good time.
Play it before the end of the year.
Yeah, we'll jump in together.
Yeah, it would be cool. Co-op, right?
Oh yeah.
But you know what is typical for studios out of the West, I think, you know, probably against popular opinion at this stage, is games like Silent Hill 2 Remake, which I had the intense displeasure of playing recently. And we haven't had a chance to make a video about it yet, but it definitely warrants one because, man, this is a profoundly bad game.
Yeah, this has been brewing a little bit, and I actually just by chance caught your stream, and I was intently watching it while you were playing it, and the whole time I was thinking, like, this just looks like boring and terrible. Like, it looks, I was like, I wonder what he's thinking about it, but like, unless I'm terribly off the mark, it just looks miserable, like, and not in a good way.
My position honestly is that this game is bloated on the one hand and standardized on the other, and we can break both of those things down maybe. Definitely
Overrated, but that goes without saying these days.
It is that. I think in the first place, it's easy to talk about how bloated it is because, you know, just got an elevator pitch for that. The original game was like 8 hours long. This one tends towards 15 or 20.
Yeah. You know? It's right off the bat,
Right off the bat, something's wonky about that. You got to ask yourself, what do they have you doing for this extended period of time?
Activities are we participating in here? Exactly.
The original Silent Hill 2 was a cinematic experience, I guess you could say. If anything, it resembled something like a Kojima game, dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like it's not a very long game, but heavy narrative,
its
right?
Direction
there's
is
voice acting.
It's
there's
narratively important, but it's also a cinematic game, heavily cinematic game, with the controlled camera angles and the emphasis on the kind of stuff you see around you at any given time, right? Like what the controlled camera angle does is it allows a director to highlight certain aspects of the
they can specifically control what you are seeing at any given moment or at any particular screen, right?
That's
rather than just having free camera control, which is, I guess, a modern luxury.
Yeah, it definitely
isn't always required.
No, it was an intentional game with a cinematic flair, and I mean, it's probably not much time today to speak to its themes, but I don't think that those are intact here either, given the changes to the art direction and even the tone you can experience in the first 60 minutes of the game. You know?
Yeah, the camera as well, you know, the over-the-shoulder camera thing.
Yeah. The biggest thing, though, like I mentioned before, that struck me is how bloated it is, you know? Like I said, they expanded the game, and you got to ask yourself, what are you going to be doing in this time? The answer is a lot of awful puzzles that really made me question, like, if survival horror is, as a genre, like, good. Is it a good genre? Does this comprise the survival horror genre? You know? And if it does, I don't think it's great, buddy. Like, I'll give you an example. You know, in the original Silent Hill 2, we might have talked about this before. You enter the town, you meet Angela, you encounter a monster within 10 minutes. And within 20 minutes, you're at this hotel that you spend some time walking around in, where you meet that famous pyramid head boss. This all occurs in a fairly condensed period of time. You know? There might be some item finding involved, like a key or something like this.
Yeah, you can probably stretch it a bit if you're really adventurous, right?
All the puzzles, though, are non-intrusive and fairly intuitive, I would say.
Okay.
You know, you need hands for a clock. You got to set them to a certain time. You find a note that tells you to do it. Things like this, right?
Okay.
You know, I never, even as a young kid playing it, I found it complicated, but it never felt intrusive to me. And when you found the solution to the puzzle, you're like, that's sensible.
Nice. Yeah.
It doesn't feel ridiculous.
Like
it doesn't feel stupid.
Whatever,
like, why would somebody do this thing that led me to this course of action, right?
Right.
Here, man, like, that initial sequence of events I described where you enter the town, meet Angela, go to the hotel, instead of 20 minutes, this takes an hour. And for that extra 40 minutes, what you're doing is finding the key to this apartment building, not hotel, excuse me. It's an apartment complex. The key is, you're initially led to believe, inside this diner or something nearby with a jukebox. So you go over there, but then you find that the jukebox doesn't play and you need to find a record. And half of it's in one guy's house, half of it's some other guy's house, and then you need to find vinyl glue to reassemble the record.
Oh my God.
And you got to travel all around town to these new locations they opened up in Silent Hill, which obviously weren't originally accessible. All the while reading these stupid, banal notes by people who obviously misunderstood everything about the original game.
Yeah.
Trying to get you more invested in this world that they didn't even themselves conceive.
Didn't create in the first place.
It's ridiculous, yeah. So I'm walking through these locations looking for buttons and glue. I'm not exaggerating at all. This is what I was doing for an hour. Thinking to myself, what is this, dude?
And that for me, like in a survival horror style game, you like takes away from the tension that they should be like building, right?
It
like,
really does. And you know, it's got me thinking, like I said, is this good in any game? I know it exists in the Resident Evil games too, and I guess what happens when you play those is it seems less obtrusive because there's these big set piece moments. There's more engaging overall design philosophy.
Yeah, I think Resident Evil does it better and shorter.
Yeah, they condense those parts. They seem like you don't, when you think back on the experience, you don't notice them. You don't get hung up on it.
Yeah.
By and large, I played all of the modern Resident Evils from 7 and 8 to the 2 and 3 remakes. The only one I don't think I've tried yet is the 4 remake, actually, because 4 was already a pretty much
4 was already
modern game. Yeah,
good game. Yeah, I mean it's great game.
What struck me here is the exact opposite. There's no interesting, punctuation to this tedium. It's just awful. Like I'm just grinding along thinking, man, what am I doing? I'm looking for what? For buttons? For what reason? And then you get a cutscene with these disgusting potato-faced people talking at each other. And you're thinking to yourself, I couldn't care less about what's happening to them. Look at them.
Yeah.
Like, people might be saying that this has to do with like the politicization of the characters, but it's not just the female characters here. Like
no, even
the
main
character looks like a potato, dude.
Yeah,
it doesn't look like his face has been made ugly for political reasons. It looks like the person who sculpted the face was just awful at their job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The 2D, the face from the original Silent Hill 2, the original 3D model from the early 2000s is superior to the James model.
Yeah, we were looking at side by side, and it's eerie how much better the original art looks.
Wow, it's profound.
The actual graphics, which should be god awful in comparison. Maybe we're
there's a lot of things to complain about here, but the biggest thing I'm trying to communicate is that there's bloat. They took what was originally a fairly condensed game and puzzles that were fairly simple. They invented dead space between the events in the original game, and they stuffed this full of bloated, tedious nonsense that draws from the worst aspects of the survival horror genre, which has you like navigating a closed space in order to find garbage to access the next room. It's nonsense.
Yeah, that's like the biggest red flag for me, as we were just speaking recently on how I jumped back into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and it's very open world-ish, and then just that bloat and all that stuff. Like it seems like that's in other games too, half of this game that they it's just
most people would agree though that Western games are plagued by this philosophy that more is necessarily better, and we just got to cram in whatever we can in order to amp the playtime, right? Like I agree, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is chronically afflicted by that, but I thought the original remake was too. It was too long. Each dungeon was way too long.
That's true, yeah.
In any case, here the problem is, you got this example of the first hour I presented you with. Now, multiply that by 20, and that's the game.
God.
You're going to spend 20 hours looking at potato-faced humans and their bad voice actors utter nonsense towards you. And in between that, you're going to be finding garbage to access the next room. And then you're going to be participating in what is essentially an imitation of Resident Evil Force Combat, which brings us to our next point. And I think that aside from bloat, the other problem afflicting this is standardization, And in the past, we've talked about how it's good when genre conventions develop that allow designers to express their concepts without having to invent new conventions each time. And that's definitely true. But what's not good is when something that already exists and exhibits a difference from those conventions is haphazardly translated into those conventions for no other reason than what? Popular appeal, profit motive.
Actually,
it did well, so I'm going to do it too. Like, you read the justification for making it play this way, and they're like, well, we wanted to update the combat for modern audiences.
Yeah, add more instances of combat as well, right? To keep, to appease. It's kind of like the same thing with, remember Alan Wake 2?
Yeah.
You said that game had way too much combat scenarios and stuff like that?
Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, it just made me think of that, right?
Nothing disappoints me more than that game. still.
Yeah.
To this day. That's awful. Like, it breaks my heart.
Because that had a really good premise behind it.
Yeah,
right?
and Sam Lake, I had previously lionized this guy. It's sad to see what happened with.
Yeah, we
with
have
that.
in the past.
Yeah.
It's there on our channel.
He ceded a lot of authority over his own work in that instance, and it's unfortunate what happened, you know. But it's a good example. You're right, and it is kind of like here. There's this standardization that afflicts these kinds of games where you see like a successful instance, and here it was the Resident Evil 2 revitalization in the past 5-6 years.
Yep.
And you see other companies come along, got Dead Space 2 remake from EA. They're like, yeah, we can cash in. Didn't even talk about that one much, and honestly, I don't want to right now.
Yeah.
All the same problems.
No kidding.
We can say, you know. And when you get to this, it's the same thing. And what these guys are doing is they're taking the Resident Evil 4 template, which Capcom reapplied to 2 and 3.
Right.
I think in those instances, it's easy to argue.
And then 4 again.
And then 4 again, yes.
What a weird
in that case,
timeline,
it's easier to argue those were genuine upgrades because Resident Evil 2 and 1 and those had genuinely deficient mechanics.
I think they also stayed more faithful to the, you know, like the game length itself, the time, and the things
They're very short games.
Right? They didn't stretch it like in this instance.
And the terrible puzzles are condensed as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but here what they have is Resident Evil 4 implanted in Silent Hill 2, and you know, you find yourself shooting zombies in the knees to drop them to the ground. Excuse me, not zombies, flesh monsters or whatever they are walking the street, shooting them in the knees to drop them to the ground. You get locked in like closed areas where you have to fend off a bunch of enemies. I was like, what am I playing, dude?
Yeah.
There's one part you walk into like a backyard and like a bunch of guys swarm you and try and like, you know, you got to do these combat encounters. It's
just not Silent Hill, I don't think.
And it feels bad. It's just, again, more, it's both bloated and standardized. And I mean that in the most pejorative way possible. Like, they haven't done this because somehow it's suitable to express their concept. Indeed, if it was, the guy who made the original one probably would have decided to do it, you know? Instead, they've done it because other games have succeeded in this format and they wanted to make Silent Hill 2 like that as well, you know? So I don't like the standardization. I don't like how the camera is over the shoulder, though the director says this is amongst the only things. The director of the original, that is, he says this is one of the only things he likes about the game. I disagree. And I think he probably would too if he was being honest, because he, in the past couple of days, has done this huge Twitter post about how the camera in the original game was an intentional choice and not a result of technical limitations.
Yeah,
the guy
seems to be defending the
he
old
seems
way
irate.
of it.
Yeah, he doesn't seem pleased with the attention that the remake's getting, despite his public statements. So, you know, I think all of those things, they represent a standardization that degrades the concept as it was originally expressed. None of it's good. And when you read reviews like on IGN, that Ogleave guy, what was his name? Anyways, it doesn't even matter. But the IGN review, they gave it an 8. The guy was celebrating exactly what we're complaining about here, that the game is upgraded and standardized. It plays like Resident Evil 4.
Yeah.
You know? That in and of itself is not a good thing, buddy.
No, not at all.
Because it implies here that the difference between Silent Hill 2 and this one is as Resident Evil 1 to this one. No, it's not.
Just taking the same game and plastering the Silent Hill skin over it, right?
It's not.
Like it's
the original was not deficient, actually.
Yes, and no, that's the other thing, is that those are perfectly playable still, right?
Yeah. So I don't know.
Aged for sure, but that doesn't always, it doesn't invalidate it.
No, I don't think it does.
Yeah.
It does only if the original is somehow deficient, which can be the case, you know? But I don't think it was the case here. And these attempts to standardize it after the manner of other successful games in recent years, they make this a different thing, and it's poorer for it. It's
it just seems very cash grabby and stuff.
Yeah, I had some respect for Bluebird before. Their original works are interesting to me, right? Like there was that Observer System redo game. It's like a cyberpunk horror thriller thing. Mm-hmm. You know, they had Layers of Fear, that game about a painter who's losing his mind. They had The Medium, about a psychic lady who can go back and forth between the spectral and the physical realm, like in Soul Reaver. So they had some interesting games. They made Blair Witch. They made some interesting games of their own, but this really disappointed me. Yeah.
That's unfortunate, but it's kind of a big thing right now in the industry. A lot of games are being remade in this style and resold at the end of the day just to make some money, right? That's what it is.
It's something to think about, right? Like you don't want something bloated on the one hand, and you don't necessarily want to standardize it either, especially if there's merit to the original configuration of
Right, you're kind of invalidating some of that, right? It's terrible.
And then, to sit here and say you're remaking it, to me, that's the ultimate disingenuity. Like, it's awful, right?
Yeah.
The idea that you're going to expand on this guy's work, like somehow you have a clue and he didn't, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I guess that would be the only caveat if like original people were involved, right?
Yeah.
To expand.
I think the original monster designer was involved, and he designed one or two new monsters.
That's probably one of the best parts of the game.
That probably is
the monster designs.
Yeah, it probably is. Might be worth seeing, but the human beings are not. But in any case, here I'm complaining about the standardization, and the obesity of
bloat,
Silent Hill 2
padding,
Remake.
yeah.
It shouldn't be the case,
Yeah.
And it should lead us back to questioning like some of the things that we include in survival horror games in the first place, because
True.
some of these mechanics are not good, dude. I think this like way of leading the player around an environment, using garbage, literally picking up garbage in order to access a new point, it's a deficient design mode, and it exists only in order to prevent them from having to think up a narrative reason to cause you to do the same thing.
Yeah, to keep the actual engaging things happening in the
Yeah, they don't want to pay for a voice actor to create a narrative cause of your traversing the environment, so they say, oh, you need like a key, or like you need to combine these two items, go find them, right?
Busy work,
yeah. So that's Silent Hill 2 Remake, and I don't like it, man.
No bueno. Play something else.
Contra everybody else this time. We've agreed with the critics a couple of times this year, but this time we definitely don't.
This time, no. And we meant to lump in a little bit of Dragon Age Veilguard, but I guess we'll save that for another
week.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much for tuning in. We'll be back in a week. Take care.
Yeah.